Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of Misconceptions. I am thrilled to welcome Toba Goldstein today. Toba, thank you for saying yes. So happy you're here. We have an interesting conversation because Toba is coming to this discussion with two hats on, right? The hat of personal experience and personal story, and then with the hat of being a professional geneticist, a genetic counselor. And we are going to kind of tease apart the interplay between your own personal upbringing and story and what that looks like from a genetics hat that you sometimes wear. So, welcome. Thanks for
Thank you.
coming.
Thank you.
All right. So, how about if we begin with like who you are today and then we'll take it backwards. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, sure. So, as you mentioned, I am a genetic counselor. I work in prenatal. So, I see patients who are usually during pregnancy, sometimes in preconception, and I see them for some high risk genetic indication. So, that could be something like family history, ultrasound findings, abnormal blood work. So, if patients are carriers of something, or if they're pregnancy screen positive for something. So I'll review the high risk genetic indication, go through additional testing options. And if they do pursue testing, I follow up with those test results.
Okay. And your personal life. Tell me a little bit about you and where you grew up and where you live today.
Yeah, so I live near you here in outside Philadelphia. I've lived here my whole life. I am an Orthodox Jewish woman. I'm married, three young kids. So kind of juggling the, working, home life, all of that. So yeah,
Okay.
that's me in a nutshell.
All right. So let's go back in time and tell me maybe you want to start with your parents' story or whatever part of your parents' story that you know about that led you to being part of their family.
Yeah, so I don't know too much other than, my parents did struggle with fertility. So when it came time to me, they were looking to adopt a baby girl. And I have a unique way where I came into the family where my parents got a call that a hospital that their friend worked at, she was the pediatrician on call in the hospital. She was there and a baby girl was born, and the mother wanted to put her up for adoption. And the doctor called my parents and said, "We have a healthy baby girl. Do you want to adopt her?" And by the next day, I was brought to my parents' house, which is definitely not the typical way adoptions happen. My husband jokes that I was like delivered by the stork. um, but yeah, I was a day old. So it's funny because on the one hand, I consider myself, from birth, I've been religious and part of my family the entire life. But at the same point, I do know there is that other kind of side of my biological family, which I don't really know anything about, which I'm fine with. I mean, we can talk about. But yeah, so I don't know too much other than that. But yeah, that's kind of how I came into the picture in my family.
What number sibling in the family are you?
I'm number four.
You're number four. And tell me a little bit about your older siblings, just about the family. I think it's a powerful story about just knowing how your parents built a family through adoption.
Yeah, so we were all adopted. It's again, I was the one that was more kind of like the spur of the moment. I know the other was more were more planned. But yeah, I think especially at the time, it was many years ago. I think the fertility treatments have certainly come a long way, and I know you've spoken to so many people who've kind of delved into that more. But I think at the time, again, I don't know in too much detail if and what fertility treatments they pursued, but I think once they were successful with the first adoption, I imagine they just decided to continue. And I know they've been helpful in other families adopting in the community and elsewhere as well. So I think it's just been a nice kind of culture of, trying not to. I feel like things like adoption can sometimes have that stigma associated. So I think it's nice that at least I know in our community there are many who've been adopted, and I think in the most part it's been accepted and nothing too crazy, which is really nice. I've actually spoken to a friend of mine who is interested in creating like a whole support group for people that have been adopted. So we're kind of in the works on that. So yeah, it's nice.
So not for those that are interested in adoption, but for those that have been adopted. Mm.
Exactly. So kind of like a support system
Yeah.
and just,
Yeah.
sharing each other's stories and maybe, insecurities or kind of thoughts that we might have in common, things like that. So,
Fascinating. Yeah, I'm not familiar. It's what I have heard is in the fertility sphere of donor conceived children, that
mm,
they are starting to put together their own support system and
yeah,
networks to get, kind of more of an more support around, like you
yeah.
just said, like the identity is a little bit different.
hmm
When did you know that you were adopted?
Yeah. So, I mean, my mother's a psychologist, so she, thank God, did a fantastic job, both my parents, in terms of, I don't really recall the conversation. I was so little. The earliest memory I have was being, a couple years old, reading a storybook about adoption, and in my head, I was just like, yeah, that's me. That's how I came home. Not that like I was in my mother's belly, but I was just kind of brought home, and it wasn't anything foreign. It was just, that's my story. But it's also funny because I grew up in such a small, tight knit community, just everyone knew, and it wasn't something I ever really had to talk about. It was just kind of like, yeah, we all knew, but it wasn't anything foreign, again, that we had to really speak about. I just kind of always knew. And it only really came up in childhood, I would say, is when, let's say, like a new kid came into the class. And they're like, oh, is it true? I'm carrying this rumor story situation. And I remember I had like this one vivid memory of this girl coming up to me, and it wasn't that she was like being extremely negative, just asking, oh, is it true you were adopted? And I remember being so caught off guard. I didn't know what to say. And I said, maybe. And looking back, I think it's just such like a funny response, because obviously if you're not, you say no. And if you don't say maybe. But I remember thinking like, I don't know what to say. I feel like maybe she'll think I'm weird, but I don't want to lie. So I just said maybe. And then right after I said that, all of my friends that were standing around me, they were like, why are you asking her that? Like, we don't talk about that. Like this, like, and they really had my back and supported me. And thinking about it, I don't think they really knew at the time what that meant, but just knowing that it was just normal, like, Toba was adopted, who cares? Just did so much in my security growing up. So
Mm.
thank God. I just feel like I always knew it wasn't anything too crazy. Um, of course, I feel like when I was in high school, more like teenagers, when I started kind of having thoughts of like, oh gosh, I'm like different. Am I like weird? But really until then, just everyone knew and accepted it. And it wasn't anything really talked about in a positive way, in that it wasn't
Right.
anything I had to address.
Other than the social experience, although that might be very, very big, we can always come back to that. But not from a social perspective, but just from a curiosity perspective or a questioning perspective, I guess that it sounds like it probably would have shown up more in your teenage years. What do you
Yeah.
remember of that time? Like, what were you questioning, or did you question?
Yeah. It's funny because it wasn't so much the adoption. It actually, for me, was more the fact that being adopted means that I'm also a convert.
Hmm.
And I remember that we were in like some class in high school and in Hebrew class, and they were talking about how you treat, widows, orphans, and Gerim converts like differently, like you treat them more special. And it was like a light bulb hit in my head of like, oh my God, that's me.
Hmm.
And I wasn't feeling good about it. Like I didn't, no one wants to feel different in high school.
No.
And so I just remember thinking like, oh my God, am I like some freak? Like I'm a weirdo. And I didn't feel good about it at all. And it was actually crazy. That week was the high school Shabbaton. So like the whole high school, the students, the staff, we all went away to a hotel that weekend, and we had all the meals together. It was really nice. And the speaker at the Shabbaton was the author of The Bamboo Cradle, which is the
Dvora
book about,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I think she's Chinese and she was adopted as a baby into
Yes.
an Orthodox family. I actually had never read the book, but I knew of it. And so she spoke. I don't remember a single word that she said. All I remember is that any questions I had were answered, any insecurities I had like completely melted away. And I just felt like I felt so secure. I'll never forget. I remember running back to my hotel room after her speech and just like sobbing and thinking like, thank you, Hashem. Like, thank you, God. You just like, I was like shaking. I was like, oh my God, this is
Mm.
crazy. Like literally the week that I decided to have all these questions. And again, I don't remember what she said, but it completely alleviated all my worries. And at that point I was like, okay, I'm good. Um, so yeah, and then really until that point, I didn't think about it much. And then it was always funny because again, I grew up, everyone knew there was very little like new faces in my life until after high school. And then my best friend that I met my year in Israel, I remember talking with my mom. I was like, it's so weird. We know each other so well, but she doesn't know I'm adopted. And it felt like, not that it defines me, but it's certainly part of who I am. But I was so nervous to tell her because I never told anyone. People just
Mm.
knew. And so I decided I was going to tell her, and I told her, and she just started laughing. She's like, what are you saying? Like, what do you mean? What am I saying? Like, I'm like pouring my heart out to you, telling you this like secret almost. She's like, Toby, you can't be adopted. You look just like your parents. And then we both start laughing. And I go, I know you're right, but like I am. She was like, oh my God. And she took it so well and all of that. But I also needed that experience because I was very nervous to tell her. I didn't know, because again, there can be that stigma. You don't know how people are going to react. But ever since then, having that positive experience, I've been very open about it. And it's not that, I tell people the minute I meet them, but if it comes up in conversation, I'm happy to talk about it. So I'm blessed. I feel like I've had lots of positive experiences in terms of my upbringing and then just how people react, that I don't feel like I need to be ashamed or hide it or be scared to talk about it.
Do one of the things that I think about is like the development of an identity.
Mm,
There you go. Okay. Are the development of an identity, a sense of self and I'm wondering just about like, did that feel you wouldn't know what different is, but does it feel different to you knowing that your origin story is a little bit different? Do you think that it's different than the typical teenage experience or the typical young adult experience, that the origin story, but more importantly, the identity of who am I, and maybe some of where do I come from? I think about, because one of the other things I really want to ask you about also is this, like, I feel like sometimes we educate to the masses, right? We educate the mainstream to the masses. We're sensitive to the major things that we need to be sensitive to. But I think that in my world, like I've interacted with certain experiences where it worries me that our mainstream education might not meet the needs of the emotional experience of some of our children.
mm,
Meaning, for example, if I know that a child knows that they cannot have children, right? That's where
mm,
it comes up the most, like where somebody knows that they don't have a uterus or somebody knows that
mm.
they have a syndrome that prevents them from having fertility. Like, how much conversation in our classrooms is all about like, and
Yeah.
the most ideal thing is to be a mother and to have a babies and to have families and to give and talking about pregnancy, and like that doesn't align with the current reality that that child might have in the classroom. So I just wonder about, so some of that question is going to show up for me as well. Like,
Mm.
as a student, like where were those points where your identity, either in development, kind of changes or shifts, or like I just want to speak about that a little bit more with you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's why in high school it really came up, because growing up, again, I feel like all of the teachers always knew, so kind of knew to be either sensitive toward it or, come up to me and, kind of put me to the side of like, are you okay? Whatever, if something came up in conversation. High school, again, many of my teachers still knew, but again, even if it was a topic that maybe they didn't think would trigger me or like give me certain thoughts, I think it's just bound to happen. For example, I feel like in school it was always a cool thing if you were a Kohen or like a Bas Kohen, a daughter of a Kohen, and my father is a Kohen. So whenever it would come up, they're like, "Oh, Toba's a Bas Kohen, Toba's a Bas Kohen," and it was always like a point of pride for me until it kind of dawned on me like I'm not really a Bas Kohen.
Interesting.
So but again, I didn't want to necessarily like burst everyone's bubble or like bring it up. But again, so it was little things like
Mm.
that. And again, because I look like my parents, I'm white like my parents, it's not a unique thing about me versus maybe other people's adoption stories. So it kind of would go under the radar unless people knew. And again, because people might know it about me, but it's not they're thinking about it all the time, so they don't necessarily know what's coming up. So there were definitely times where I felt it, but it was nothing was ever malicious, or if people could see I'm uncomfortable, they would come up to me. So for example, this Shabbaton, when I was very emotional after hearing the speeches, like teachers did come over to me and like check on me and see, like, am I okay?
Yeah.
So
I'm going to press pause here. So when we're talking about, hearing about the school experience, one of the things that I'm wondering about more is like kind of inside your own heart or inside your own mind, it sounds like you were so well adjusted that it wasn't like something that you kind of agitated on for a while or over long periods of time. Do you hear that in other people who are adopted, that there's a sense of like, who am I? Where did I come from? Or is that something that's unique to you, that you really didn't have much kind of emphasis on that?
yeah, I think a lot of the different experiences could be based on like how people find out they were adopted, or like for example, one of my friends that I met in college, she found out that her mother was adopted, but like not from her mother. Like she found out, like in the locker room in high school or something, was completely
Ooh.
traumatized. So I think from like the people I've spoken to, I think a lot of it is more how they were told, who told them, things like that, in terms of how well adjusted they are to the news and how it affects how
Mhm.
they grow up. So I think a combination of the way I found out and just my personality, I think did allow me to be well adjusted. But that's not to say that I've never had questions, because I think it's just only natural to be curious in terms of like, where did I come from? And I honestly think my path to genetics kind of subconsciously came kind of stemmed from that.
Mhm.
My ninth grade biology class is when I learned about genetics, and I just found it fascinating. Like, oh, I have green eyes. Where do my green eyes come from? And I think, again, always that I think that's kind of how my questioning was kind of channeled, in terms of just like the scientific
Mhm.
questioning of
Mhm.
it. And then, like the emphasis was on all of these Ashkenazi Jewish genetic diseases. And for me, I'm like, well, I'm not genetically Jewish, so I think it was more that's how my kind of brain channeled all those questions. I never, you always think about like, who are my biological parents? What's their story? Why was I put up for adoption? For me, it's always just been more just, again, the thinking about it. I've never put it so much into action or felt like I needed to kind of look into that more, but I can totally understand people that do want that. And I think, again, a lot of that has to do with, what is the family that they were placed into, how much love and support are they getting from there, and do they feel like there is something missing? And I think it's just and again, I think I meant to give this disclaimer ahead of time, but just, everyone's different, everyone's experience is different. And I think when you meet one person who's adopted, it doesn't mean you've met them all. And to just understand, just like with anything, everyone has their own experience and where they're coming from, and that all shapes how they're going to react to it all.
Yeah, for sure. When you think about, you said that you haven't really, explored who your biological parents are. Is that something that comes up at any time, or is it more just like, yeah, no, I'm just not at that. Like, is it like a casual thing for you, or is it something that you've given a lot of thought to and are like, this is not something I actually want to pursue or I'm interested in?
I mean, I, so to kind of backtrack a bit, I didn't think about it much until I had my own kids. And at that point, the only information I really would be interested in, if anything, is more medical history. Again, in genetics, I know the importance of genetics, family history, medical history. So for myself, yeah, it's definitely scary not knowing what my medical history is. But then also for my kids, I'm like, I don't even know what I could be passing on. So that for me, I definitely feel that's missing. I would love to know what what I might be holding in terms of that. But in terms of like the social dynamics of, I honestly, I feel like just going down that road, I'm more nervous of kind of what could happen in terms of, you know, just the kind of domino effect of, I know I'm adopted. I know I have this family out there. But for example, I did ancestry testing more for fun. I We always joked I look Irish, so I wanted to know kind of what my ancestry is. And actually recently I did match with like a second degree relative who I think is my half sister. And she started messaging me and she's like, how can this be? Is this true? And I'm like, well, I was adopted, so I'm not surprised. But she seemed very surprised.
Oh, wow.
And she said, well, you can't be related to my mom because she did ancestry also, and we didn't match. So it must be through my father. And he had no idea, which again is very possible that he could have a child and not know. So I honestly felt bad. Like I don't
Sure.
want to be like ruining people. I don't, that's not what I'm looking
Yeah.
for. So again, I think it's more just, it's out there. Sure. If they ever reach out and want to, I honestly don't think I'll know my answer until if and when that happens.
Hmm.
But I think again, also just, I don't know what the snowball effects of that are. So I think
That's
the more
fascinating.
like
Yeah.
that, like, I think I'm more anxious of that unknown versus needing to kind of go down that
Mm.
road.
It's interesting. I never really considered the snowball component of it, right? The
Mm-hmm.
knowledge component I've thought about often, but the snowball component of like, what does this knowledge then introduce into your life, like,
Mm-hmm.
and into the
Mm-hmm.
lives of your children? And I
Exactly.
guess I think we have to be honest that being part of a religious community, the lives of those that you might be interfacing with might be incredibly different than the one you're living.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
what does that mean? Are you obligated? Are you encouraging? Are you
Yeah.
desiring that relationship?
I think it just invites a lot more complications that I
Hmm.
don't think I necessarily need.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, and it's funny because my daughters know that I was adopted. They kind of, I mean, my younger one, I don't think she really understands the concept of it, but my 10-year-old definitely does. And it was funny the way she found out was we were at my parents' house and she had a stack of books she wanted me and my friend to read. And of course, one of them was that childhood book of adoption. So I'm reading it, and my friend, who's the one that I told at first about being adopted, she starts crying. She's like, "This is so beautiful," and I'm like laughing. I'm like, "What's happening?" And then my daughter looks at me. She goes, "Mommy, were you adopted?" Like she was picking up on what's happening. I'm like, "Oh yes, I was," and she's like, "Okay," but so it was just funny how that kind of happened. But yeah, and I think again, I think it's just important to be open about it, but at the same point, I don't feel that need of, searching, every road and avenue of kind of where it came from. Again,
Hmm.
if it comes to me, that's one thing. I'll address it if and when that happens, but I don't need that.
Hmm. What was it like for you to have your first child? I just think about
Yeah.
like you, especially as a geneticist, like what kind, we're all curious when if we're
Yeah.
blessed with children, we're all curious to be like, who does the baby look like? If we're blessed with a genetic child, especially, right?
Yeah.
Like, what was that like for you the first time you saw your own genetic family?
Yeah, it was really special for sure. I mean, as much as we joke that, I look like my parents, which I do, it was always very like I always really thought about I really want someone who's related to me. I think more than other
Mm.
people would. So, of course, I always said if I couldn't have my own biological children, like I would have been happy to adopt, but I definitely did want to like be able to see myself in someone else. Um, was very powerful. So the fact that my kids have my eyes, and when people say they look like me, I think it does. It hits home. It's really nice.
Can we talk about that comment of the kids that went, it's one of those comments that I absolutely have just eliminated completely from my language.
Mm,
Not so much because of adoption, but more so because of donor conception. I've come to
mm,
understand How many people are walking through this, especially in our religious world, that are using donor gametes that are not disclosing? And so when I meet with somebody and everyone's like oohing and ahhing, and the baby looks just like you, or the nose is yours, or the husband's eyebrows, it's like I never say those things anymore. What is, can you talk a little bit more about that genetic identity, looking like your mother, being blonde and
Yeah.
really, yeah, I could see it because I do know her.
I
But
know,
talk
and
a little
it's
bit about
funny
that.
because I love when people I always tell the person, I'm like, go tell my mom that I look like her, because I love her reaction. She's always like, oh my goodness, like we don't, she's like, we can't look like each other. I even have such memories of like going store shopping in New York as a kid because we had nothing here in Philly. And we would be checking out, and the cashier's like, oh, you look just like your mother. And my mother's like, no, she doesn't. Like, what do you say? I get a kick out of it. I think it's hysterical. But it's just so funny how even after people know I'm adopted, they're like, but you still just look just like her. Like, and people find it fascinating, which is cute. But I think that is very mindful and sensitive of you to not say that, knowing, in this day and age is true. Who knows how people are conceiving their pregnancies, or even if it is, their biological child, like the lengths they might have gone to get there, it
Yeah.
might, bring up maybe emotions that people aren't anticipating.
Yeah.
So for me, because I know, they're my kids, I don't mind when people say it to me, or if they say it about me and my mom. Again, we kind of just think it's funny. But again, I think we are unique in that I'm adopted, but again, we look like each other. I think most people that are adopted are of a different race, or maybe don't look like their parents. So I think it's a lot more obvious. But again, it's just a good thing to just, like you said, be just more mindful of, is that you never really know what people's situation is, and even if it
Yeah.
looks completely obvious, it may not be the case.
I think it's fascinating that your mother didn't just lie. Like in that moment where with the where the cashier is
He's
like,
like
she looks just like
incapable of
you.
lying.
She's incapable of lying. She's a too much of a straight hour, I guess. Yeah. But like I wonder sometimes there's, I've spoken with women who have not disclosed that they're using a surrogate, and they've been able to hide the fact that they were not the ones that were pregnant with the baby for different reasons. And when someone says, "Oh my gosh, like what was the pregnancy like, and how do you feel, and all that," like they're able to actually they like climbing into that narrative. Like there's a part of them that just kind of is choosing to revel in that non-identity of just pretending like everything
Yeah,
is normal. I wonder, sometimes I wonder about that. I
yeah,
appreciate it. I just wonder about, like, I don't know that there's a better, smarter way, but it's interesting to hear your mother and your experience of it, where I also could imagine where for somebody else that those comments would be particularly difficult, right? Like if the cashier had said like she looks just like you, and your mother would have to be like, but she doesn't because she's can't because she isn't,
right,
right?
right,
And for both of you, that could be a complicated space versus a funny space, right?
right, for sure. Yeah, and I think my mother always just finds it, you know, because to her, she's thinking like practically realistically, right? Like, no, you don't look like me. Like, we're not blood. But I think to us, I think it's like we take it as a positive, right? Like to me, she is my mom. I love that people say I look like her. We kind of take it as that compliment versus, trying to make it into this whole, you
Mhm.
know, kind of complicated thing, which it certainly could be. Um, yeah.
Did you ever speak to your mom about like what led them into the space of adoption, even though you're the fourth of the four, right? The fourth of the family. But I wonder about what those conversations look like. I'm dealing with the parents who are moving into parenthood in that space, like that new space of either donor, surrogacy, adoption. I'm wondering if you've had conversations about like what was it like before when you had to go through fertility treatments or you were making the decisions to go ahead and adopt, like, do you ever have those conversations with your mother about what it was like for her?
I We've had a few conversations. Think it's been she was very involved with my pregnancy, was at all my birth, just
I keep losing you.
We have had a few conversations. I feel like it's been a while though, probably when I was pregnant with my oldest, who's 10, because my mom was very involved with my pregnancy. She came to, appointments, ultrasounds, and she was at all my children's births. It was, really special to her, and she never went through that. So I think in a way, she was kind of like living vicariously through me and, being
Mm,
very involved. Um, Again, from what I know they did struggle and I think they did try, but at a certain point, I think adoption was just the next option. So I don't have too many details about it, but I think it's also something that is in her family. I know like
mm.
other family members were adopted. So I think maybe it was something more like in her family. But again, I think the testing now and just the knowledge of causes of fertility have, you know, in the
Sure.
40 plus years have significantly increased. So, maybe now there would have been, additional options, but I think at the time, um, adoption, I think just was their best route is kind of what I know.
I guess I'm more curious about like what those conversations between mother and daughter sound like, right? Like, do you have, and again, I might be assuming that those conversations happen and it sounds more like this is just the life we lead. It isn't something we talk about,
Yeah,
right?
I would say it's more like that. It's definitely something that's come up, but we don't talk about it all the time. Um, and also as the child, I never want to make them feel like I'm
Mm,
upset or, that I have, negativity toward it. So, I mean,
sure.
growing up, my parents were definitely open if I had things, but I always felt kind of guilty bringing it up because I never wanted them to feel like, that I wasn't their child, which of course I felt like I was.
Hmm.
So there was that kind of like, sometimes I had questions. I didn't know if I could always talk about it. I would, but I didn't want to make them feel bad in a way, which
Hmm.
maybe
Hmm.
isn't accurate, but that I definitely remember having that feeling of, should I bring this up? I don't want them to feel a certain way. That feeling definitely, went away as I got older and we could definitely talk about it. But I think, yeah, to me, I more see them as my parents. It's not something that I kind of think of that
Right.
much.
I was thinking more like when, as you experience parenthood,
Mm,
kind of looking at your parents through the eyes, looking at any parent through the eyes of now an adult, now a mother yourself. Like
hmm
I just, and again, I'm being very clear. I'm not asking you to disclose anything intimate about your parents or their lives at all. More amount of your own experiencing, the story in a different way. Like to be like, I feel like until we're
mm,
in that lived space, it's like I never knew what my parents would have experienced, right? I never knew
right.
what my mother would have gone through. And I think it's just a kind of a powerful perspective and knowing what you know, especially professionally, right? Like
hmm
I imagine you bring so much more sensitivity, and maybe curiosity to the work that you do. How do you think that your adoption or being adopted influences the work today that you do as a professional?
I asked patients if they were. Yeah, so as part of my job, we ask all our patients for their full family histories and we ask them if they were adopted. So I think with my history, when a patient does disclose that they were adopted, I think I I would imagine I come to it maybe more sensitively than other people. And, sometimes I will disclose if I think it'll make them feel more comfortable or, because there's no right or wrong answer, but I feel like maybe sometimes they're, feeling some kind of way about disclosing. So I think that sometimes helps alleviate some of their anxiety. And, we will offer them a large carrier screening panel because if you don't know your medical history, again, it could just give you more answers. So I think it is interesting how some people, will jump at it and want to have all that information, whereas other people, understandably are maybe nervous to open that Pandora's box, as I call it, of, maybe they don't want to know maybe
Right.
what their background holds. And I think, I mean, that's the case for people that even do know their family history because even people that weren't adopted sometimes know just as little of their family history as people that were adopted. So I think that's also something that, I try to reassure patients about. Um, but yeah, I think I just come from it from my own perspective. And again, I always say I really do think subconsciously having all of those questions of my background has sought me to go into this field of kind of looking for answers.
Yeah, I have to imagine that it does. I'm thinking about what it means to be adopted into a religious life, right? So there's
Mhm.
this part of me that always wonders about if there are people that were adopted, like, is there a feeling of like, I wonder what my life would have been like if I wasn't part of a
Mm.
religious world? Like I could have been a part of a non-religious community. Like, is that ever something that you think about or daydream about?
Yeah, I always joke, like, especially when I'm like at a workout class, I'm like, oh, if I wasn't from, I'd be a cheerleader. Like I always have those kind of thoughts of, like the clubs I would have been in, or, the places I would have been. But yeah, like you said, I think it was always more just like imagination. And, again, when I told my friend I was adopted, she's like, you're probably a lost princess, like all of those things that, like, again, as a child, you're like, you watch, Princess Diaries, you're like, it must be a lost princess.
Oh, wow.
But I think that's part of, the childhood coping also, right? Of you have these questions, you don't really know what to do with it. And I think that's how your mind kind of works through it. But, outside of those imaginations and like laughable, like I would have been a cheerleader. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of the extent of where that went.
When you think about kind of having conversations with parents who are considering adoption, you come to this story like so ridiculously well adjusted. It's like there isn't even so much to talk about because you're like so normal, like so healthy, like really pathetic, but thanks. But I think it's such a critical narrative that the well-adjusted, healthy, we talk about these things. I'm very aware of how my identity developed over time. Like, it's important that this conversation be had as well as the challenges of adoption. And I don't think that we should ever minimize the reality of the challenges of adoption as well. Um, and especially nowadays, where often adoption comes along with drug and alcohol addiction and withdrawal, and a little bit more of a complicated
Mhm.
development experience, I guess we should say. But I'm wondering if you were
Yeah.
addressing from your story and your perspective, if you're having a conversation with somebody who's considering adoption, what would you like to tell them? What would you like them to know about this experience?
So I would say first and foremost, I think the most important thing is again how you tell them they were adopted, because I think that's what really shapes their experience and their identity. So to just do it as early as possible, sensitive, that this is, how you lovingly came into our house. Again, I don't know what specific words my parents used, but, and I'm sure I think all the data shows that, the earlier it is from the parents is the best. So I think that's first and foremost. And yeah, to just normalize it. It doesn't have to be talked about all the time, but to be questions that, every stage in life, again, different things hit. So again, I think for me, I had my experience in like lower school, then there was the high school, then there was the post. I have such vivid feelings of each time of my life. So I think just even maybe just checking in every now and then and say, hey, you're in a new grade this year, maybe some new people, maybe new friends, has any new questions come up? And then if yes, great. If not, not. So again, I think just having that open communication, but not necessarily needing to talk about it all the time is kind of how I think, if I was in that position, that's kind of the way I would go about it with my experience.
And do you feel like, I'm just curious because I didn't ask anything about your siblings and again, respecting their own privacy, but do you feel like your siblings all experience this similarly? Or would you say actually no, they have their own unique stories of how their lived story of adoption?
No, and I think that's a good point, is that even within my family, we all see it very differently and have very different experiences and feelings toward it. So I know for myself, again, I'm very open about it and always happy to talk about it, but that's not the case for all my siblings, and certainly isn't the case for, anyone who is adopted. So I think that's also just a good consideration of, even within the same household, people are going to have different experiences based on their personalities or based on their own origins. And so, not to just, it's not one size fits all.
hmm one of the things that we talk about when we deal with donor conception is like the story doesn't really have a loss narrative, but the loss is more about the parent maybe not being able to conceive naturally and having their own genetics, but there isn't really a loss narrative for the child. But when you're dealing with adoption, there is some level of my biological parent placed me outside the
Mm-hmm.
family, or in the old language it would be gave me up, right, or did
Mm-hmm.
not want me. And so I'm wondering about how you feel about the loss narrative. Like, it does not sound to me like you have a loss narrative, but I'm wondering if that is something that you're noticing maybe among siblings, or just kind of, or maybe it did show up for you at some point.
Yeah, I think I never thought of it as a loss per se, because I never knew them to have lost, right? But I definitely did have those, thoughts. I think more so at a younger age of, why was I put up for adoption? What was their story? All I really know, and what I know, I don't even know how accurate it is, but apparently my birth mother didn't even know she was pregnant when she went to the hospital, and, was young and in college and just couldn't have a child, which to me, again, it's valid enough that I feel like it didn't make me have too many questions of, it's not like she knew about me and thought about it. I think it was more of just, it was all a shock, which I understand. But I think that's more information that many people have. And even that, again, how much is that already?
Sure.
So I think it is valid to have those questions. Me personally, I definitely had those thoughts of, where am I from? Why am I where I am? But I think, again, I've just been so blessed that it wasn't something that was a constant, because I was put into a family that I love so much, and I was given so many opportunities. And um, yeah, I think it's just something that now, being a mother myself and, being an adult, you still think about it, but it's more of just like, oh, I wonder, and then I move on. It's
hmm
not something
hmm
that I think about too much, but again, everyone has their own experience. I think for some people it is maybe a real loss and really do want to know,
hmm
because they feel
hmm
like it is more of, their identity and, what's behind that. And I think that's very valid, but I think it's just a personal thing of how much that really plays a role in your life.
I think it's what I'm hearing as like your theme also is like, it might be important, but it also might not be important. It is something
Mm,
to think about, but it might not be the biggest thing to think about, which really
right.
is an incredible, I think that might be, maybe I'm kind of promoting this question of misconceptions. The misconception is that all adopted people will experience these narratives, will experience these difficulties. You
Mm-hmm.
need to know that this is what's ahead of you. And maybe that's really a misconception. Maybe let's
Right.
talk a little bit about, what are some of the other misconceptions that you would like to change relating to adoption?
Yeah, and this isn't something we touch on too much, but I think, you know, the fact that adoption is kind of like a red flag. Like, I know, for example, when I was in like the matchmaking shidduchim process, it was like, at what point do we tell that I'm adopted? And, there was so much just like anxiety around it. Like, how are they going to react? And, as much as I would like to think that was not necessary, in some cases, it could cause, issues. So, um, I just wish that wouldn't be the case, because yeah, certainly there are children who are adopted who have trauma, who have, maybe some, baggage related to it. I've personally never had that. So I think it's just like with anything, you never want to judge a book by the cover. And, I've had people who have outright said, like, I thought you'd be one way and now I meet you and oh, you're, totally normal. And like you said, well adjusted. And I think it's important to just know, like, there's that spectrum, right? For anything, some people are going to be, it very much embodies their experience, and, they have lots of issues maybe related to it. And like you said, some people can have issues with, the drugs, and there's more negativity maybe towards how they came into their family, whereas other people, they either don't know their stories or maybe it's just not as negative. So I think it's just like with anything, to just give people a chance, not to judge them by it, and just try to treat the person for who they are.
So if we bring the story back to the beginning, because I think this makes me wonder when you said you'd like to have that we're working on creating a group of adopted individuals, what do you see as valuable to you? I feel like you have a lot to offer other people, but I'm wondering what do they offer you? What do you imagine is valuable in having this connection with other male men or women who are adopted?
Yeah, I think it would just, again, because even as, well adjusted and great as I am in terms of, I don't think it really affects me in a negative way, my history of being adopted. It's certainly something that I think about. And, again, in my stage in life now, I think the anxiety is more, again, in terms of the medical, the unknown. It's to me is like one of my biggest anxieties, just the unknown. So I think it'd be nice to just speak to people who can relate to that more versus, just like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. So I think in that sense, maybe it's not, the upbringing or, the search for, biological family isn't so much in the direction of, filling any kind of void, but just, like I've spoken to my brother about, the lack of medical information. And that's something that, again, we relate on. So I think it's just helpful to just speak to people like with anything when you have common ground. I think it's just easier to talk to people like that. So I think that in a way would be something that I would find supportive.
Fantastic. I look forward to hearing that develop. I absolutely am curious as to see how that develops with especially if that's something that can develop within our community, meaning broadly the religious Jewish community. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you're like, you need to bring this up because you didn't bring this up yet?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think I've been thinking about this and kind of what I was going to say. I think we've covered a lot of it. Again, just to add, I'm very open about it. And if people ever, want to talk to me, I'm always happy if you want to share my information with them. But otherwise, no, I don't know anything else unless you had any other questions
No,
or.
I think this has been a really interesting conversation, and I think I'm so curious to see. I think what most startling to me is, that well-adjusted piece that keeps coming to the top of mind for me. That idea of like, I think sometimes you as therapists are always looking for the hard stuff, and sometimes it's not there, right? Sometimes when you have these conversations, you realize that no, actually, sometimes for some people, this is just right, and it
Mhm,
worked, and
mhm,
they're okay in all the right ways and all the normal healthy ways, and I just appreciate that because I also think that it leaves room for all possibilities for somebody considering alternative,
mhm,
ways to build their family rather than some of the more kind of promoted assumptions about where the hard stuff's going to be. And I
mhm.
think that this really kind of creates a new nudge in a different direction. And so thank you for being willing and open and honest. And maybe I can even convince your mother to come onto the podcast. That would be pretty amazing. I wonder, I
You know where to
wonder.
find her.
I do know where to find her. She's fantastic. Toba, thank you so much for saying yes. Thank you for
Thank
this
you.
conversation.
Thank you so much.